Well, I've been asked to talk about the concept of community living and how that relates to people with disabilities. I'm very conscious that some of the points I'm going to make you've already heard, but I'm working on the basis that if something's worth saying once, it's probably worth saying a couple of times, and on some of these issues it's definitely worth saying a few more times. I'm also going to be looking at sort of perhaps addressing some of the points that we do need to consider when we're looking at the concept of community living and thinking about how that we can make that a reality for people with disabilities. So the issues I'm going to cover, and I've been told it needs to be very brief, so all of them will be very brief, is first of all looking at Article 19 and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, as has already been mentioned before, I mean, the issue about community living isn't something that just relates to people with disabilities, but the really important aspect of this right is that it's the first time that the right to community living has been crystallised into a right that's set out in an international human rights treaty. It happens to be in this new Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but the right to community living applies to all of us. I'll then be looking at the development of the right to community living, and then thinking about community living, what it means and why it matters, and again, why it matters to all of us. Then making a few comments about deinstitutionalisation and Article 19, and following on from that, some myths and misconceptions, and these are just examples, I'm sure we have a few more. And then finally, and also very briefly, just a comment about the role of structural funds for future reform in relation to community living. So, in relation to Article 19, you've already seen this before earlier this morning, but again, it's worth emphasising that what it talks about is the equal right of disabled people to live in the community with choices equal to others. But then it makes clear that states have obligations to ensure that that happens. And it says that states must take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate disabled people's rights, to enjoy this full enjoyment of this right, and full inclusion and participation in the community. And then Article 19 sets out some specific examples of what states are expected to do to ensure that this right is realised. So, including equal opportunities to choose where and with whom to live, access to a range of community services, so that goes back to supports that are going to be really important, but also crucially, this is not just about specific services for people with disabilities, it's saying that people with disabilities have the same right to access mainstream services as everybody else, but then you need to ensure that those services are responsive to the particular needs of people with disabilities. Within this right, I should just very briefly mention, it includes a concept called progressive realisation. So there's a recognition that not all states, when they ratify this convention, will be able to meet this right immediately. But what is expected of states is that they have concrete measures to put in place this right. So what you're expecting states to see from states is that they've shown that they understand, that they have a duty to ensure that people with disabilities can live in the community and participate in the community, and that they were taking measures to realise this right. So it's showing how they're doing that over a period of time. So that's a really important concept to bear in mind when thinking about Article 19. Just very briefly talking about community living and what that means for people with disabilities, this is something that you'll resonate with points made earlier this morning, but talks about people with disabilities being able to live in their local communities as equal citizens with support that they need to participate in everyday life, including living in their own homes, we've heard how important that is, or with their families, going to work, going to school, and taking part in community activities. So these are things that most of us take for granted, but unfortunately still for a large number of people with disabilities, that is not something that is meaningful in their life. These activities are not something that they are able to engage in. So just turning to thinking about the right to community living, and you've heard it before, but the rights in the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities are not new. I think what's exciting about them is they're setting out in very important ways and making clear states' obligations to realise those rights. But you'll see from this is an example of some comments from both the United Nations on the left-hand side and then from the Council of Europe on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go into all of them in great detail, but just on the right-hand side, you've got the United Nations, the standard rules of equalisation of opportunities for persons with disabilities. These were standards that were set out in 1993, and here you can see that one of the standards says, persons with disabilities are members of society and have the right to remain within their local communities. They should receive the support they need with ordinary structures of education, health, employment, and social services. So that was in 1993. And then the Council of Europe, as I said, made similar comments. Looking then at in relation to older people, just thought this would be a useful example. You can see again comments from the Committee on the Convention on the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It made a comment in 1995 about the importance of independent living for people, older people, and then the revised European Charter of 1996 for the Council of Europe. You'll see it says states to adopt or encourage measures to enable elderly persons to remain full members of society for as long as possible, to engage elderly persons to choose their lifestyle freely and to lead independent lives in their familiar surroundings as long as they wish and are able. So again, you can see very, very strong statements about the right to community living. So then just spending a bit of time thinking about what exactly does that mean. Well, we've heard about the importance of thinking about where we live. We want to live in somewhere we regard as home. That's important to all of us. We also want to have things to do in our day-to-day life, whether that's work, and work is very important to many of us, leisure activities, and then who do we spend time with? Personal relationships and social networks are of great importance to us, as is the issue about participating in the community through civic engagement, such as the right to vote, or indeed to stand for elections. But then sort of thinking about it a little bit in more detail, I mean, what you can see from this right is that it's really focusing on individuals as human rights do, but it's ensuring that it recognises our connection with others. And Gerard talked about the fact that we're all wired to connect. And I think from a human rights perspective, this is really interesting and important, because perhaps sometimes too often we just focus on individual human rights. But here it's making absolutely clear that for us as individuals, it's really important to have the opportunity to engage with others. And that's something that the right to community living sort of really expresses very well. It also highlights something that I think it's worth us all thinking about, is that, and again, this is something that's been said already, but we all need support to realise our aspirations. I challenge anyone to say that they've achieved their goals without having support from others. And so what we're looking at is the fact that all people need support, but then it's a question of individuals will need particular support to help them to achieve their own dreams and aspirations. And just thinking about Article 19, you'll see this is a note from the former Commissioner for Human Rights, Thomas Hammerberg, who said Article 19 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities embodies a positive philosophy which is about enabling people to live their lives to their fullest within society. So the crucial importance of the right to community living on Article 19 is particularly important in relation to countries where people are still placed in long-stay institutions, and that is something that it happens across Europe, but is a particular concern in Eastern and Central Europe, where often the environment and the conditions in the institutions are dire, to say the least. The importance of Article 19 is that we now have something we can say, this is a right to community living. This is something that is highlighted in the human rights treaties, and we need to ensure that we can respect that. It also underpins a policy from both the European Union and also the Council of Europe about the promotion of social inclusion, challenging discrimination. And then we can use it to as I said, to highlight the fact that many thousands of people are in institutions. There's a report from 2007 that indicated over 1 million people across Europe are placed in institutions. And as I said, there are many concerns about the human rights abuses within institutions. But in fact, whatever the conditions are in institutions, they are, in essence, they are contrary to the right to community living because of the way institutions are. They isolate people. Their routines are about what's convenient for staff. There's very little choice of control for people placed in those residences. And therefore, it's something that is absolutely clear is incompatible with the right to living, community living under Article 19, but it's also something that's considered to be unacceptable practice in the 21st century. The European Union has ratified the CRPD, and on that basis, there's very strong arguments as to why the European Union should ensure that member states who receive structural funds do not use those structural funds to maintain institutions. And unfortunately, as many of us know in this room know, that is still going on. And I've made a reference to a report that really sort of explains why that is both contrary to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and also contrary to EU law. So just very briefly, because I think I'm running out of time, community living and deinstitutionalisation. This is a huge issue, and I think we do need to have very considered debates. But so often you have these misunderstandings about what community living is. First of all, it does promote independence, but again, as we heard this morning, that is not about isolation. There is a difference. People be supported to live independently, i.e. to choose how they wish to live, but the support needs to be there. It's not about placing someone in a flat and then leaving them to get on without any support. Nor is it, and this is something that I think people get very tangled up with, it's not just about the physical environment. Yes, there are huge concerns about the massive institutions that people are placed in, and that needs to be resolved, and people should be able to live in home-like environments. But it's the nature of the support that is as crucial to the where people are living. It's how people are supported to achieve their own goals. And that then leads on to the second point, which is deinstitutionalisation is only a factor in community living. We need to ensure that people are supported to be able to live their lives within their communities, to develop social networks, to seek employment, to engage in civil life. And this is a point that was made by the European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency when it sort of did some research about people with disabilities views on independent living, and you'll see that it said for persons to have choice and control over their lives, they should, for example, be allowed to vote in elections and stand for public office, facilitated to work through reasonable adjustments in the workplace, and allowed to enter legally binding contracts. So that is what we need to be thinking about and when we're talking about community living. And as I said, structural funds have a very important role to play in promoting community living, in particular in Eastern and Central Europe. We're going to be hearing much more about that this afternoon, but I'll just leave you with this quote from the European Funds Toolkit, which was published in November of last year, which I think really sort of just encapsulates the importance of structural funds and how we need to ensure that they are used positively to enable all people to have the right to community living. It's a complete waste for structural funds to be used to maintain institutions, and we need to ensure that that practice is put an end to very soon, if not now. Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Madeleine, sorry. Mm-hmm. We all know Madeleine in Ireland very well, and she keeps shining the light to the future. and occasionally incentivizing us to get our to move to the future with some money here and there. Okay. Again, many thanks. You might have heard what Camilla said there. It's not good enough anymore just to agree with Article 19. We have to be able to show that we are genuinely applying it right across, and it doesn't mean moving from institution to many institutions in the community, and it certainly doesn't mean to be institutionalized or isolated in your own home. It means full participants of people in the community, people of the community. So very often, what we often see right across Europe is where it's been attempted. We have small housing groups at the edge of the community and things like that. That's wrong, wrong. Every time you see that kind of behaviour, just point it, shout it from the rooftops, because it's hurting a lot of people. Madeleine, thank you.
Thank you very much and good morning. First of all, thank you very much to Professor Gerard Quinn, who provides such great leadership here at both the practical and the conceptual levels. I think everybody who knows Gerard knows how inspirational he can be, and I think what a fierce combination to have linked up with Senator Catherine Sapone, a great human rights leader here. So great to have pulled this together with such an interesting mix in association with the presidency of the Council of the EU, and to have the support of the EFC and the Fondation Monse is also terrific. I'm going to talk about something quite practical here, both at the practical level, but also tell you a little bit about the strategy behind what we do. But I'm going to kick off by maybe just bringing this to life and introducing you to some of the people that we're involved with. And we work across disability, mental health, and with older people, particularly with dementia. So just to start, a short film, just 3 or 4 minutes long, and then I'll just run through some points explaining a little bit about the work we do. Thank you.
GENIO works to ensure that people who are socially excluded get better lives. The socially excluded people we're concerned with are people who have disabilities, have mental health difficulties, are disadvantaged by lack of educational opportunities, are older.
I want to be like other people, living on my own in the other apartment, going out to work like everyone else, knocking their door after them.
Tanya lived in a comfortable setting in my apartment with 40 or more people. She didn't have access to a kitchen, she didn't have access to a key for her own door. She couldn't lock her bedroom door at all. She had to write her name on her clothes so that other people wouldn't take them.
We were told our child would never learn anything. All his life, Eamon always wanted to be a farmer. Eamon was never afraid to do anything that he was asked of him. We were afraid because we didn't think he was capable of doing it. So I knew this farmer up the road, so Sean went and approached him, and he was more than willing to take Eamon on. And Eamon is up on the farm now, I would say about a year, March, April gone out, loves it.
Well, basically what we're doing is working to support 10 people who've been in long-term institutional care to move from living in the large institution to living independently, integrated in the community.
Some of the people that are moving out lived here until quite recently, so it's very difficult to have any privacy and peace and quiet.
Tony O'Sullivan is a 60-year-old man. He suffers from cerebral palsy, so he's limited enough mobility. He's been in the centre here in St. Riffles for about 40 years. Tony's instantly likeable. He has a great smile. He's very able to communicate his thoughts kind of through his eyes and stuff, and he can use his hand gestures. So what you see is not what you get with Tony. You know, it's only recently that I say Tony's actually been given the opportunities and challenges, and he's actually exceeding all of them.
So GENIO can be the catalyst for things to happen in this particular area. We can bring resources from the private sector, coupled with resources from government, to ensure that the needs of service users are met And those needs are to live lives as full as they can in the community, just like we can.
There are quite a substantial amount of resources already being spent on disability services and mental health services, but the resources are locked into old models of care, and many of them are locked into institutions. GENIO can be helpful in that what's needed is a little bit of additional funding which can leverage that change within the system.
Citygate applied for a grant from GENIO to transition timely from the accountable setting. We received that and it gave us the extra bit of support that we needed in order to make this transition happen.
It was a great feeling that my own key into my own hand, because in the residential unit I didn't have a key.
You know, it's a huge change for a lot of people, and we're working to kind of support them in building their own skills and belief in their own capacities to do it, and also to set up the supports that they need to make it happen.
By giving to GENIO, you are giving the opportunity to thousands of other people to lead full and real lives in the communities, making choices that we take for granted.
Once we bring society with us and we become part of society, not a subset of society, if we don't achieve that, then the whole society is going to fail.
And last Christmas I woke up in my apartment, in my own place, last Christmas morning, and it was a great feeling.
Okay, so that just gives you a little flavour of some of the work we do, and I'll explain it a little bit more comprehensively now. Okay, in the few minutes that I have, I'm going to try and do 5 things. I'm going to share with you a couple of things that I've learned over the last 34 years working in social services. Tell you a little bit about how we try and help implement policy here in Ireland, how we do that and the kind of impact that we have, and then some of the challenges that we're facing in GENIO and in the country here for the future. Okay, so briefly, you know, it becomes very clear as you're working in social services over the years that the challenges that are facing people who are excluded they're significant and they're complex and they're systemic. So that the solutions that we need to meet these problems have to be complex as well. And supporting people to become included means that we really have to appreciate the uniqueness and individuality of each person. Okay? So that means that solutions to be effective have to be individualised, and they have to promote inclusion, and they have to foster self-determination. And it's certainly my firm belief at this stage that getting movement here is best done by fostering collaboration between public, between philanthropic and private, and between non-profit sectors. I think that's really a good way to get some change. Okay? So they're just some things that I've just crystallised when I was thinking back, you know, what is it that drove me to get involved in some of the work that I'm doing now. And before I tell you a little bit about the strategy, I think it is important that we retain a focus on the people that we're talking about. So Tony and Tanya and people like that, we're very grateful for them, you know, in the steps that they have taken, the challenges that they have taken on in their lives, moving from situations after many, many years where they had very restricted choice to having to make quite large decisions in their life, and helping us to tell the story of the work we do. So you've met Tony. This is the kind of place Tony has been living in, you know, very institutional, hospital beds 2 feet apart. This is what his home has looked like. So it's for people like Tony that we're working. We have 3 programme areas. One is in disability, one is in mental health, and the third one is in dementia. So what are we trying to bring about in those areas? I've tried to just put on one slide here what we're trying to move away from and what we're trying to move towards. And all of this, of course, is enshrined in the Convention and in our national policy and in the policies of many countries at the domestic level, reflecting the international aspirations. So we're trying to move from, you know, a situation where we're affording people only marginal citizenship. I see some people writing, sorry, I have brought copies of slides there in case anybody wants to take copies here. moving from a more paternalistic situation to helping people to become self-determined, moving from group-based type focus to more individualistic approaches, moving from just not simply locating people in the community, but actually supporting people to be integrated in the community. So hoping that people's lives are going to change as a function of moving geography is never going to work. We really need to get in there and support them. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. It's there if you want it, and I think it reflects what we've already been talking about and some of the speakers have already talked about this morning. The policy context here in Ireland is really exemplary and very courageous, and we're very proud, I think it's true to say, of our national policy. In disability, we're talking about a fundamental change in our approach that's predominantly centred on group-based service delivery towards a model of person-centred and individually chosen supports, which is a marvellous phrase, I think. In mental health, similar type person-centred approach, special emphasis given to the need to involve service users, their families, the carers at every level of service. Okay? So what we do in these areas is we're working to try and increase the number of people that live as part of their communities and that avoid institutional care. So we're helping people either move out of institutions or avoid institutional care. And then we're also working to help people participate in education, in employment and in meaningful activities, okay, in the way that you and I get to do all the time. In the dementia space, and it's very interesting listening to Professor Bickenbach talking about the very compelling figures earlier. We're helping to inform the development of policy that's coming about in this area. Okay, so we're doing that by trying to improve the range and the quality of community supports. We're working in 4 geographical areas here in Ireland, helping community groups, voluntary groups, service providers, old age psychiatrists, all of the people involved come together to see what can they do as a unified group of people to help support people with dementia to stay connected to their communities and to stay living the kinds of lives that they want to stay living in. Okay, so we're really just a small catalyst trying to bring philanthropy, government together to produce some system-wide change. Okay. I'm going to simply fly through this because I've been given a sign here that the time is running out, so I don't want to encroach on other people's time. This slide is simply telling you that, I suppose the simplest way to make this point is to realise that, you know, evidence, no matter how good it is never enough to change. And the idea that opposition and resistance will fall in the face of irrefutable evidence is just completely naive. And that to do system-wide change means working with all of these stakeholders. And that's what GENIO is trying to do. Our model is to provide financial support in the form of grants, and those of you with a particular interest, the advertisement is going into the national press on Wednesday for this year's grants round, to invest in building skills and leadership alongside organisations like the Federation of Voluntary Bodies, like Inclusion Ireland and other people who can really help bring the innovation and change. And then to gather evidence and measure impact as we go along. Okay? We have 153 projects at this point, and we're joining all of those up, and hopefully they will be added too. Okay? These are the kinds of investments that we've made. Combining philanthropic and government funding, we've invested 15.9 million in grants. That's leveraged over 25 million in resources. And of course, what we're trying to do is demonstrate how you might reconfigure the large expenditure programme in this country, which is over 2.3 billion in disability and mental health. These are the people we're helping. Our goals are by 2019 to continue to support the implementation, to continue to work on the demand side by supporting good advocacy for this kind of support, to continue to help the supply side by enhancing the capability of providers to meet that demand. Our challenges, of course, are to build on the existing philanthropic support, which has very generously come from Atlantic, who, as you know, is a Life Limited foundation. So we're very interested in partnering with other foundations who are interested in this kind of high impact system-wide scaling. We want to continue to work with government to demonstrate good value for money and help them, give them the ammunition, if you like, to roll out that very good national policy. So for philanthropists, it's about providing opportunities for maximising impact and lasting legacy. And for government, it's about getting in there and helping them take, as they say, the bone from the dog and providing a kind of a catalyst to get the reform happening that we're all so conscious about. In terms of structural funding, I think, I just finished by saying, It's a wonderful phenomenon. I think it would be really helpful if it wasn't going to support moving things in a backwards direction, if at least it didn't get in the way, and if at best it could support things travel in the direction we're also committed to see happening. That would be a really good advance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. Now, thank you, Louise, please. Just to say, maybe what we need is a GENIO right across Europe. Because very often the challenge of moving, it's not just people who are residents in institutions, it's the whole mindset of people who are working in the areas as well. They're often locked in, so it's not an easy thing at all. So actually, by moving the whole works, it takes quite a bit of time. And please, where is Andor? He's up there. Listen. Don't do any harm, okay? And don't send good money after bad practices. Are we ready, Louise?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much indeed to NUIG and Dr. Jared Quinn and all his team for inviting AGE to come here and give some indication of, civil society, older people in Europe and the views that they have. Sorry, one of the problems I have coming at this stage in the morning is that so many excellent ideas have been bombarding us all morning. There's an enormous temptation to keep revising my paper, But I know there's a great opportunity this afternoon for us to pick up on those ideas and discuss them. So I'll try and stick to what I plan to do, but I don't know whether I do it or not. As has already been said, a lot of the kind of general principles have been stressed today, and I will start with what older people want, which is the vast majority of older people want to live and age at home within their own community. I mean, that is sort of the basic line. But in order to do so, as Professor Beckenbach has already pointed out this morning, we need accessibility and provision of services, access to financial and social supports, when and as they need them, which will enable them to remain as independent for as long as possible, okay? I was asked to say a little bit about employment if it fitted in, so I will, because obviously employment is the basis of a true economic independence. And I think, again, that's what we need to keep in mind. However, I feel, and AGE feels, there's a great deal of ambiguity about the employment of older people. That on the one hand, in the time of changing demographics, many of the country's many member states are raising the pension age, and yet non-justified mandatory retirement is commonplace in many member states, okay? I personally feel, by the way, that being forced to stand down from a job simply on chronological age is one of the most blatant forms of discrimination that exists, okay? And unfortunately, it has been supported in ways that are a little bit insidious, because as recently as 2010, in the joint cases of Gerrit Fuchs and Peter Kuhle against Land Hessen, the European Court of Justice judgment suggested that it's legitimate to retire older workers to encourage the promotion of a younger workforce and to prevent disputes concerning employees' fitness to work. I mean, if we have that sort of thing happening, it was really a big challenge and a big battle to be won, And there is also the problem that in times of recession, that older workers are frequently the ones who are made redundant because younger workers are cheaper to employ. So there is that kind of push also there. So although discrimination in employment is illegal in the European Union, it is still quite prevalent. According to the 2012 Eurobarometer on perception of discrimination, age is fast becoming the most commonly perceived disadvantage in the labour force. And this strongly reflects the reality that is faced by many older workers, in particular older women, who are amongst those most affected by the crisis and one of the groups most likely to lose their jobs and be unable to find new employment. Now, obviously, this has a significant impact on the pension contributions and savings that they're able to accumulate. and thus will have a knock-on effect on what their income will be in old age, which is what I'm trying to link in with employment, that how important employment is to ensure adequate income in older age and to ensure access to services and an ability to participate as fully in society as you choose. The other impact that is there is the problem of career breaks linked to care responsibilities, which has a long and affects older women particularly when it comes to their pension contributions, etc. So I'm suggesting that there needs to be a consistency in tackling discrimination against older workers and the whole range of supports to encourage older people to remain in the workplace, if they choose, by the way, but it needs to be explored. Flexibility, upskilling, appropriate training, and so on, okay? To allow people to work as long as they wish and as long as they are able, and to contribute fully to society. But it also has that LinkedIn thing that will enable them to have those years when they will be requiring financial supports in order to have good quality of life. And I think, I know very little about structural funds, sorry, but I do think structural funds can play a key role in this, and I hope we'll have some discussion about that later on this afternoon. Now, Professor Sharper also mentioned about age-friendly environments, and this is something that Age Platform is really, really keen to push forward, etc. Because in order for older people to live independently in the community, the provision of suitable living arrangements, and I'm talking not simply about the physical structure, I'm talking about all the things which impact on people's lives. I mean, transport, access to lifelong learning, participation in all sorts of levels, that age-friendly environments will play a key role in actually contributing to this and to allow people to remain independent. Now, as has been already mentioned today, the European Innovation Partnership on Active and Healthy Ageing, before it was launched, AGE sent in a submission highlighting that the EIPAHA should seek to promote a holistic vision of active and healthy ageing as being, and I'm quoting, the process of optimizing opportunities for physical, social and mental health to enable older people to take an active part in society without discrimination and to enjoy an independent and good quality of life. For AGE, this meant, and this will come from our members, okay, that the EIPAHA should not focus exclusively on the purely medical dimension of ageing, but should also seek to support the development of non-medical innovative solutions, should I say, to support the active participation of the 50+ in society, in employment, in their communities and in their homes. Creating an age-friendly environment is key, we feel, to the success of the EIPAHA. When AGE was a member of the steering group that was set up and that drew up the strategic implementation plan for the EIP, and AGE managed, not without difficulty, let me hasten to assure you, to convince the EU policy leaders of the importance of age-friendly environments to support longer and healthier lives. And the promotion of age-friendly environments is now included in one of the 6 priority actions under the EIPAHA. So AGE submitted in May 2012, in response to the call launched by the European Commission, a commitment to build and to run a campaign for the launch of an EU covenant on demographic change, which will seek to create the necessary political and technical framework to bring together local and regional authorities and other stakeholders across the EU who want to find smart and innovative evidence-based solutions and to facilitate the creation of EU repository to support active and healthy ageing and develop age-friendly environments. Now, inevitably, as we have learned today already, as people age, they will become dependent through illness, reduced mobility, or increasing frailty. Quality home and community care is required for those who develop limitations in their daily activities. And action is needed in the framework of age-friendly environments to combat the threat of isolation and social inclusion, which has been mentioned again quite a lot today, that you can't solve one problem and create others, that we really need to be very constantly aware that if you bring people out of the community they understand and know and put them into independent living, that you may be creating enormous problems of isolation. I think there are some very good examples, and the one I just mentioned briefly is the Fredericia municipality in Denmark, which, based on rehabilitation to help the older person in need of care and assistance to learn how to regain autonomy and remain at home in a safe environment. And this was the winner of the EY 2012 award for age-friendly environments, and it really is a very good example of what can be done. I think we also should keep in mind that age-friendly communities should also become dementia-friendly communities to build support for people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia and their informal carers, and to enable them to have a good quality of life. And there's a very good example also from Spain, where the Spanish Red Cross, the Alzheimer's Spain and Vodafone have come together, and where they not only equip older people with GPS, but the technology to so they know where they are and where other people know where they are, but also to provide training to all sorts of people within the community, bus drivers and trained police, etc., of how to deal with people who have dementia. And it is also a very effective programme. I also just want to touch briefly on two things which tend to get pushed down along the way, and that is elder abuse and end-of-life care. I haven't got much time, I've been given the warning, but I think we just need to keep that in mind when we're having all this discussion. It's also a problem when you're talking about age that you talk about active age and active age. We must keep those in mind, okay? Age has been involved in two projects, the Eustacia project, which developed a European Charter of Rights and Responsibilities for people in long-term care, not necessarily in residential care, but in long-term care. And the We Do project, which followed and was just launched last November, has followed up there with a quality framework of how to treat people again in long-term care. I think again with the charter, it gives very good guidelines on palliative and long-term care, and we're talking the same language here. It is giving people choice, giving people the right to say what they want, but ensuring that that is implemented and that is what's carried out, and that is the basis of how decisions are made. So I come to human rights, on which all of this is based, and this is where I may be a little bit out of kilter with some of the other people who have spoken. I feel that although there is no doubt that the conventional rights of people with disabilities, which most of the EU states have ratified, has been of enormous importance to older people. I just want to say the obvious, that it is great for older people who are disabled, but not all older people are disabled, And we feel in age that there is no instrument, no human rights instrument, which adequately addresses all the aspects of age. And again, some of the other speakers have spoken really well about this, that the issues of, you spoke exceedingly well about how the issues and the solutions are quite the same, but there are differences. And I think what we need to do is sort of use what is good here and apply it. And as Jared very briefly said to me over coffee at the break there, this is the beginning of the discussion, this is what's very interesting, because there are all sorts of ideas and some of them are conflicting and whatever, but we have to kind of tease them out and get what's best. And I am now rounding up, okay? But I'm just going to say a kind of, that whenever older people are not seen as holders of specific rights, there's a risk only of a perfunctory level of protection rights, which will be provided to them as older people. So I'll keep this. There will be a chance after to fill this out more. But age has now become involved very much post-Lisbon with the fact that we have been asked by the UN Open-Ended Working Group to represent European civil society, since we represent so many million older people throughout Europe and whatever. And our members feel it is really important to engage in this discussion, to look at what might be the best instrument. Whether that is a convention for older people remains yet to be seen, but what is the best instrument that will protect older people? But there's one point that our members have been very, very strongly emphasising, and that is that it's really important not to stereotype older people further, okay? And therefore not to put sort of chronological age again, that you are older at this point and whatever, but rather to look at how to protect rights that have arisen from issues because you are older, I know that's a little complicated. I'm sure there's a much more easy way of saying that. So I'm going to end with one little idea. Just it arose out of just the idea, of course, that community living gives identity, gives self-identity. It gives positive physical and mental benefits to people as they age, etc. And last year, Professor Roseanne Kenny, whom many of you know, who's Professor of Gerontology in St James's and leads the TILDA project on longitudinal study, gave an example of a village in Italy where people were living longer and had fewer health problems, etc. And it didn't seem as if it was only the Mediterranean diet that was contributing to this, but rather that everybody had a role within their community and had a feeling of belonging. And I was very much struck by that when I love Italy, and I was in Ravello, one of my favourite places last autumn. And I mean, it's a place which is absolutely thronged with tourists during the annual musical festival. And during the day, during the season, like buses roll in, mid-morning and roll out again late afternoon. But after the buses leave, people sort of gather, and the old men gather in the cafes and the piazza and play dominoes and cards, and it seems to not matter whether they buy drinks or not. And the children all play wildly around the piazza, but under kind of the watchful eye of grandmothers who are sort of gathered around the outsides. And then the young people come home, some of them help go into the cafes and shops, and their parents come out and do passeggiato around the place, and then people come back from work and join people in the bar and whatever. And as inevitably, the fellows strut around the piazza and sometimes on the motorbikes, eyeing the girls who are pretending not to be interested at all, but all under the watchful eye of their parents, etc., And then as sort of dusk falls and whatever, young people help older people up the hill, and, people disperse, and the children, women come home from work and gather the children. And there's an enormous sort of sense of community. And as I was saying earlier on, I mean, I know it's most probably not idyllic, human nature being what it is. I'd say there are lots of petty jealousies and whatever about it. But there is a sense that if anybody isn't there, that somebody's going to go and find out, if, what's the matter with them, that there's an enormous kind of awareness of being from Ravello in the first place, and also having a role there, and it doesn't matter what age or what disability you have. And to me it seemed to be a very good example of community living for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
The discussion we're having here today on structural funds and investment funds and the potential impact on the right of persons with disabilities to live independently in the community is happening with absolutely perfect timing. As we all have discussed, it is now time to establish the future priorities for the use of EU funds, both at European and at national level in our countries. But the context today is worrying, as it was much better in the past. But more about that, I'll talk about that later. We cannot ignore the fact that within the EU there are still hundreds of thousands of children, persons with disabilities, persons with mental health problems and older people who live excluded from the rest of society and face a life of exclusion, poverty, health inequalities and reduced life chances. The EU structural funds should support national, regional and local authorities in designing and implementing structural reforms aimed at promoting inclusion and independent living. This can be done by promoting accessible infrastructures across the EU, creating employment opportunities and skills development for persons with disabilities. Among several ongoing initiatives in this regard, EDF is a member of the expert group on transition from institutional to community-based care. And we took part in a project on the development of guidelines and a toolkit on how to use EU funds to promote deinstitutionalisation, but you will hear about those in the session later this afternoon. The European and governments have to acknowledge that we are now working in an entirely different legal and political context, which obliges us to enforce fundamental rights of persons with disabilities at all costs. This context includes specific targets set by the EU 2020 strategy and several actions planned under the different flagship initiatives. In particular, I reference the initiative of the European Platform Against Poverty and Social Inclusion, and furthermore, specific actions aiming to promote the participation of persons with disabilities has been planned in the EU European Disability Strategy 2010-2020. However, the financial downturn moreover forces us to do so by allocating EU funds to protect the citizens hit hardest by the crisis. At EDF, we have long been advocating that future structural and investment funds promote the rights of persons with disabilities, including the right to community living. We ask that national governments and the European Commission conclude partnership agreements which focus on promoting employment, supporting labour mobility, promoting social inclusion, combating poverty, and investing in education, skills and lifelong learning, and also a capacity building of organisations of persons with disabilities, and this is vital. We believe that partnership agreements should endorse the horizontal principles as they are in the legislative proposal and as they have been reinforced by the Council of Europe and the European Parliament in this regard. If we were to consider the type of priorities that should be funded in order to promote community living, these should be specific actions targeted at employment, training and social inclusion of persons with disabilities, including transition from institutional to community-based services. The priorities just mentioned are all backed by articles in the legislative package on the future structural and investment funds, which is under discussion now. We need to promote accessibility of persons with disability under this aim, and future structural funds should promote and invest on accessibility for persons with disability. This is supported by the following articles. Article 7 includes accessibility as a horizontal principle. Article 48 states that the ex-ante evaluation shall include measures to remove barriers. Mainstream of participation of persons with disabilities is a basic vocational training and access to training and ICT skills. Measures to increase participation in mainstream education, job creation in SMEs and support for self-employment, transition from institutional to community-based care, integration into employment and education and training, consistency with national disability strategies, and again, capacity building for stakeholders. Let me finish by saying a few words on a very positive element introduced by the European Commission and supported and even strengthened by the European Parliament. I'm referring at this point to the ex-ante conditionalities, i.e. the conditions to be respected in order to receive EU structural funds. These are the general ex-ante conditionalities on anti-discrimination, gender equality and disability, as well as the thematic ex-ante conditionalities on the fight against poverty, social inclusion, which is fundamental as it requires national strategies on the transition from institutional to community-based services. A year ago, however, on the 24th of April 2012, the General Affairs Council deleted these ex-ante conditionalities on non-discrimination, gender equality and disability, and we regret that this unfortunately is still the position of this Council. Now, how can we achieve community living or any other type of equality if in the EU we do not respect these fundamental principles? Participation and inclusion of persons at risk of discrimination and the fight against poverty and social exclusion must be supported by the EU structural and investment funds. This is also a direct requirement of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, TFEU, where we find the same paragraph, Article 3.3, that the obligation that the EU shall combat social exclusion and discrimination and shall promote social justice, protection and equality between women and men. Okay, I'll get there. Between women and men, and solidarity between the generations and protection of the rights of the child. It shall promote economic, social and territorial cohesion and solidarity among the member states. EDF, together with other European organisations, including Age Platform, sent a letter calling on the Council to uphold the general ex-ante conditionalities on non-discrimination, gender equality and disability, and to the European Commission and to the European Parliament to keep their strong positions as promised and to be the guardian of these fundamental rights. In the letter, we also call for the safeguarding the thematic ex-ante conditionality on promoting social inclusion and combating poverty, and in particular measures for the shift from residential to community-based care, and to ensure that every European citizen enjoys the right to live independently. We remind Member States that the EU has legal obligations to apply to all its actions, including structural funds, and that in today's social and economic context it is their common interest that the structural funds are used to support the fundamental rights of citizens and social cohesion across Europe. The prevention of inequalities and discrimination based on sex, racial or ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, age and sexual orientation is established in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union, Article 10 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, Article 21 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as ratified by the EU, and other articles mentioned above. A decision to remove the general ex-ante conditionalities will be in breach of all of these fundamental treaties. European citizens will not accept that important social, economic and employment provisions are either jeopardised or lost in political discussions. When lack of trust towards the European Union is growing across countries, and even more in time of crisis, the EU and its institutions should show responsibility and leadership in the use of European money. It is, after all, European taxpayers' money. It is our money. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Yeah. Emma, please. Next. So now we're beginning to hear everybody's at it. We're all moving in the same direction. So all we need now is the money to come with us. Okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. How much time do you want me to speak? And because I was told I had to prepare for half an hour, I checked, and
we'll give you 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, I warn you because in Spain normal lunchtime is 3 o'clock, so for me it wouldn't be a problem. Okay. So my presentation, and I will jump then through quite a number of slides because I really had to prepare for a long time, but no problem. It was your minister that said that she puts aside her speeches, so why shouldn't I be able to do the same? Okay, so I will try to provide you a little overview of the evolution of the European policy context in the towards today, and how the right of community living has been dealt with. I have to say I had a great time looking to some of the papers, my old papers. I immediately jumped to my own cupboard, and I have to say that the first document that I saw where there is the Commission really embraces the social model of disability and the new approach towards disability is this 1996 European Community Disability Strategy, and one of the authors of that is Jerry Quinn, no surprise to you, who used to work at the Commission and be a good inspiration for all of us that were entering the Commission at that time. I have to say that it was consolidated in the strategy, in the Disability Action Plan, and that the European year 2003 was really a catalyst for that. And now the European Disability Strategy 2020, it's a clear, contains a clear embracement of this paradigm shift, and it is really inspired by the principles and values of the Convention. If I look to the first time, it was 1996, it's almost 20 years ago that this change has entered into the community now EU policies. So, beyond this morning, the Minister also mentioned the need to have courage and passion to work in this field. I will say also perseverance is a good quality if you want to be successful here. Anyway, going to the subject, to the focusing of who are the people that we are addressing, what are that our policies are addressing, I would like just to very, very firmly say that the majority of Europeans are older people, whether we like it or not. Eurostat is collecting statistics, and it is the same. It is in the same individual that is old. The same individual is disabled, and it's an inherent characteristics of that person. So policies to be successful need to address the person, the individual, their needs, and bridge these two characteristics together. So I couldn't be more in agreement with previous speakers that have referred to these needs. And in fact, for me, this has been a kind of a surprise, this separation. I come from a background where when I entered the Commission, I was working on technology for disabled and elderly people, accessibility, assistive technology. We never questioned at that time. I think I had been very privileged to have a very multidisciplinary team, a team that included geron technologists, assistive technology experts, scientists, and it was given for granted that what you need is to have products that are able to provide personalization, that are flexible, that cater better for the needs of individuals, and that whether the person is old and disabled, or one or the other, or it is flexibility, it is the characteristics of those products that you were looking. So I have been looking with some astonishment with the separation of those two fields, even from the technological area, in the research area. I think that only by bringing them together, we would be able really to have products that address individuals' needs in general, and that you are able to use them throughout your life as long as you want. So it is a matter that, to my surprise, when I entered more into other policy fields related to disability, I saw that this separation is really institutionalized in policies, in administrations, in funding, and that is important to bridge and to break those gaps. So I think the conference of today is really an excellent learning field for all of us to see how that can be improved. So by now I have messed up all my slides. So I will go back to them. And I will just say that these issues that I'm talking about, they are very well reflected on why do we have a disability policy. And this is because persons with disabilities across the EU have got similar rights, but they also have the same obstacles and barriers. And the policies aim to address individuals with disabilities, whether they are young or old, in order to improve the situation. In doing that, we are trying to bring together three basic pillars. I mean, we can work in terms of legislation, we can work on policy making, and we have financial instruments. And the subject of today, which is the structural funds, brings together those three pillars. We have to work on the regulatory side. The regulation needs to be correct. We need to have the pillar of the policy making, the dialogue with the actors, the guidance provided for this instrument, and the money well spent and targeted to those actions where it is more needed. A lot has already been said about the legal basis and the charter. And I just would like to have a couple of reflections on the UN Convention. The Convention has been an excellent instrument for us as in the Commission, as policymakers, to influence and to anchor the human rights perspective into disability policies. As you know, and it has been said, the Convention is an integral part of the EU legal order. And the EU is bound to the extent of its competence, but the beauty of the Convention is that it's helping us to shape secondary legislation. It is in between the treaties. We can only do what is in the treaties, that's clear, but we have below secondary legislation, and we now in the mainstreaming and actions that we undertake, we can point out to the legal obligations of the Convention to substantiate the actions that we are aiming to include into the mainstreaming of these policies. And in doing that, I think our dialogue with our colleagues in different directorate generals has strengthened, has been enriched, and my colleague Andor, that will present the structural funds legislation later will be able also to tell you about. I think it is very good to as an instrument to have a reference document that has a formal role to play in this shaping of legislation. So our main policy framework is the European Disability Strategy. It has also been mentioned extensively. It contains 8 different action lines, and I would like and a number of instruments that I mentioned before. But I would like to highlight 2 of the areas: accessibility and the area of participation. Without entering into too much detail, I will do that later. Why those 2? Because in the area, let me start by the area of accessibility, and I'm choosing that as first because in the strategy starts with an A, and it's also very dear to my heart, so I have all the reasons to start with it, but also because it is really a precondition for all those things that we have been discussing today. Community living, equal participation is impossible to be achieved without full accessibility, and full accessibility with the aim to provide equal access. What we want to achieve, what the inspirations of accessibility is to contribute to this equal access, and in that there has been a lot of debate in this field. You need also to have the assistive type of service provisions or assistive types of solutions, having it hand in hand through universal design or design for all, or however we want to call it, in order to achieve this objective of the equal access. The same applies, of course, it applies to these structural funds. In the area of, and I don't want to skip the others of employment, social protection, financial support, where we have also some actions, but in the area of participation, when you look to the strategy, we have addressed 2 main things. One is the use of structural funds to support the development of community-based services, and the other one to raise awareness about the situations in which people are living, which is very important. People need to be informed. It is not it is not enough just to come with a demand of what model do you prefer, or people would prefer. It is important that in this policy development process, people are informed about the conditions in which people are living in some of these community settings. So we have actions that deal with dissemination of guidelines, good practices, increasing the knowledge base, working on the physical infrastructure, but also on the professionals. And I have to say that in this, when developing these actions, we have been very much inspired by this type of research work that has been done in the past, and I want to encourage this university to continue building on that research, and I think it is a great opportunity to put together this life course institution. I would like to refer to this study of 2007 on the costs, the economics of community-based, and bring a tribute from Jim Mansell, which was one of the first ones that put on the table this cost issue, and say that it is not a cost savings institution. On the contrary, community-based services can be cheaper for the same quality. So all those actions also we try to increase the dialogues with using the conference that we have in the European Day. The Commission has been supporting this the expert group on transition that has been mentioned before, and we will continue to do so. When it comes to accessibility actions, I want to share with you that we are advancing on the preparation of the Accessibility Act, which is is a directive that looks to the possibility of having common harmonized requirements at European level for accessibility. It is a big challenge, and I'm sure that will contribute also to inspire and to bring information into the funds. The structural funds required accessibility, and it is important to have good reference documents. I said what accessibility is, what are the priorities, and how accessibility has to be achieved. And in fact, very briefly to share it before closing, to say that in the recent Eurobarometer that we published last year, so Eurobarometers are polls that say what the public opinion thinks about a subject, the overwhelming support of accessibility towards accessibility has been impressive. I mean, we are talking really about more than 90% of the people agreeing on improving accessibility, spending more money on accessibility, removing barriers, agreeing on obligations for public authorities as well as for industry to develop things accessible. So I don't know how much we will be able to achieve in this directive, but we are really feel confident by this support. I also want to say that in all this process, we should not underestimate the role that in policy making and in legislation making has the dialogue between the different stakeholders and different stakeholders with different opinions. They are actors in the policy making, and we need to negotiate with them the different positions. When we are looking to what is happening in the structural funds, in the preparation of the Accessibility Act, we are preparing ourselves with arguments, with documentation to participate in that dialogue with convincing arguments and data. But they also have their own arguments and data, and it is something that requires, as I said before, a lot of perseverance and good skills for negotiation. And my colleague Andor will also address that. So in the issue of the structural funds, I mean, we have got in the regulation some of the elements, the main elements about disinstitutionalization, support employment, use the funds for improving education of persons with disabilities, the issue of accessibility, and so forth and so forth. But now the phase comes not only to finish the regulations but also to negotiate the operational programs with the member states. For doing that, with the Commission, we have prepared, and I'm jumping to the next slide. Okay, we have prepared the Common Strategic Framework, and there you have seen that we have written quite a number of those actions. So member states now should know what we think it's important, what we have collected from the knowledge and the demands from the stakeholders in this field that should happen. That document contains really a lot, and you will get my slide to see of actions that can be undertaken and that can be financed both in the regional funds and in the social funds. I'm not going to enter into each of them. But finally, I would like to say that in preparation of those negotiations with the member states, the Commission has prepared a paper per member state highlighting what we think, and again, based on this common knowledge that many of the stakeholders have shared with us, what are challenges that need attention with the funding that the structural funds are providing. And you can find for each of the countries key priorities. Those documents are public and they refer to all those issues that we have mentioned before. So my last slide is just to tell you that although I have not taken about the different elements, I have on purpose not talk about the different elements of the regulations, the articles and how they stick together, because my colleague Andor is going to do that. And we are working very closely together to ensure that our policy fits properly and it's fully integrated in that regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'm looking at Andor's face there and he's saying, what's going on here? just to say very big thank you to all the speakers, and also because we give them a really hard job, we asked them to put big chunks off their time so that we could come in on close to 1 o'clock. We're going to skip the Q&As. We may have some time extra, and later on, and we'll do that. Just through a quick, I'm going to attempt this at least. So remember, we had Camilla right back at the very beginning. She reminded us how the UNCRPD, particularly Article 19, the obligations and the ways. So we can't just nod to it anymore. We have to do something. Then we had Madeleine showing us how to bring old money into new ways of spending by adding a carrot and a little stick to it. So making sure, and who knows, it might fit right across Europe. And then after that, we had Louise, who says, really, you know, the discrimination and asking people to retire on the basis of age is all wrong. I think we would agree. I'm beginning to agree. We're getting close to that agreement. Also, she said to us very, very much, well, as the UNCRPD is very useful, there is a gap. There are the people who are not disabled, but who are older. So what about us, or what about them? So that's very much so. We heard from John Pat, who got us back on time very well. He told us about the influence of EDF, but that's what I heard anyway, and how they're right at the engine pots and so forth. And he showed us some nuts and bolts and some of the principles and things like that. But then finally, coming up at the end there, we had Emma, and she very quickly said to us, look, this UNCRPD has been a great help to us. It's an anchor of all our policies going forward, and we're using it in how to measure our progress and things like that. And so there is no way we can put in for any silly money to build more institutions or hide more people away for the future. No, we can't. So for me, I say thank you. And then I have to say a particular thank you for Kathy, because she did the real hard work here. She kept forwarding the paper across and so forth. And she's made sure we got into lunch on time. So very, very much thank you all, and enjoy lunch. Good night.